Salut à tous et bienvenue dans l'épisode 10 d'Up&Thunder, votre podcast 100% sur OKC. C'est Pierre qui vous parle, je suis très heureux de vous retrouver. Je fais cette courte intro avant un épisode très spécial aujourd'hui puisque j'ai la chance d'avoir aujourd'hui avec moi Erik Horne, journaliste et insider du Thunder pour The Athletic. Le podcast va être en anglais, donc je m'excuse pour ceux qui ont du mal avec l'anglais et je m'excuse aussi par avance pour toutes les erreurs que je vais faire. So now, let's switch in English. Erik Horne, thank you so much for coming on. It's going to be a real pleasure talking with you about the Thunder.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pierre, man. I always enjoy talking about the team, and I always enjoy people taking interest in the team.
First, for the French fans who don't know you, can you just introduce yourself and your work?
Yeah, I've been covering the Thunder for 5 years. This is my first year covering the Thunder for The Athletic. I covered the Thunder for 4 years at the Oklahoman in Oklahoma City. My first year was Kevin Durant's last year in Oklahoma City. So it's safe to say that every season I've covered the Thunder has been full of excitement, full of action, some fun games to watch, great players to watch. And it's a really cool team to follow because they always compete and they always have, since I've been here, had, all-star, Hall of Fame caliber players.
So you were here for the separation with Kevin Durant, actually. So that might be a good things to cover.
Yeah, it was an interesting time, man. To see Durant and Westbrook kind of at their sort of the peak of their powers, trying to work together to get a championship, and then to see it kind of unravel too. In the past few weeks, I've kind of had a lot of time with the coronavirus stuff going on. And, I've watched some clips of those guys playing together, and it's cool to see it, but at the same time, it's bittersweet because the more you watch them, the more you realize that they were really missing some things that could have helped them, to be a great team. They didn't really have a real offense. A lot of it was just those guys having to make plays on their own. And that's a really discouraging thing, especially when you see now the Thunder plays, more of a team-oriented basketball. It's less isolation, and the ball moves better. But it's a shame that wasn't a thing that happened with those two guys because they were so good individually that I think that the team sort of kind of just fell back on their individual talents rather than developing, a better system.
Yeah, maybe the roster construction was not good for them too. You talk about how Thunder play offensively, but there is no shooting around them. No maybe system. Billy Donovan came in for the season. You start covering the Thunder, but that didn't change anything. I think that was the isolation game, Westbrook in pick and roll with Adams and KD just with a screen to get an open shot. But I agree with you. There is no it's not like the Spurs, It's not like this year, as you said.
Yeah. It was very predictable. They didn't get into offensive sets very quickly. It usually came down to those two guys making a play at the end of the shot clock. And, we say so many good things about guys like Steven Adams and Andre Robertson or Kendrick Perkins, but the Thunder never could get well-rounded players around those guys or enough well-rounded players around those guys. Like Steven Adams was a guy that was limited, in terms of how he could space the floor. Andre Robertson was a guy who wasn't a very good shooter, who had to just rely on stuff around the basket and cuts. Didn't space the floor very well to where you could basically just shade off of him or not even pay attention to him on the backside of a defense. And that just makes everything more difficult. The inflexibility of some of their lineups, whether it was Scott Brooks or Billy Donovan, some of that speaks to them not having the proper personnel. And some of it, frankly, is just bad luck. They had a lot of injuries. Some of it's just bad luck too, because you also have, for as much as they lacked offensively in terms of guys that that could do a little bit of everything to help Durant and Westbrook, they also had guys that were unique. You know, Serge Ibaka is a really unique player in NBA history. He was a rim protector who could space the floor. There just aren't that many guys like that who can guard every position on the floor, can protect the rim, and can space out to three. When you have a guy like that, it's hard to come up with excuses for why you can't win a championship. They should have won at least one.
Yeah.
Just disappointing that they couldn't with as much talent as they had.
One regret I have with Ibaka, he only plays a 4 position. You know, he was never the center.
Yeah.
He was always with Adams or Cantor, and we never use the small ball lineup, you know, with Ibaka and maybe KD playing the 4. And I believe that could be a solution in the past to one against the Warriors, one against maybe the Spurs at one time. That's the regret I have, because right now Ibaka is doing very well with the Raptors, playing the 5, maybe playing the 4 too. But we Donovan or Brooks never tried that.
Yeah, well, like with Ibaka, you know, that was a frustrating thing, because I think the Thunder's best lineups was when they went with Ibaka at the 5 and slid Durant up to the 4. And, you know, as we said, like Steven Adams is a good player, but he's not as good as Serge Ibaka. And when you slide Ibaka up, you know, it allows for you to get another perimeter player out there. And people want to knock Dion Waiters or whatever, but in that 16 year, Dion Waiters was probably playing the best ball of his career. He was good enough. He was pretty stout, strong defensively. He wasn't a great defensive player, but he was good enough to where he could guard a couple of different positions and he could switch. Robertson obviously was a guy who, you know, could guard a lot of different positions, all the way up to the 4. And then, you know, Westbrook can switch too, and Westbrook's not a great defender, but he's 6'3", and he's pretty strong, particularly like as a post defender. So when you threw all those guys out there and you had Ibaka at the 5 able to space the floor, it caused the Warriors some issues, man. And it caused a lot of teams issues in terms of having 5 guys that could basically defend, you know, 3 or 4 positions at a time. And then on offense, you know, getting out in transition with those guys, it wasn't a bad proposition either. You weren't going to have the 3-point shooting at every position like you wouldn't be able to with Andre Robertson, or, you know, you can a little bit with Waiters, but it made you a little bit more versatile when you could put Serge at the 5, and they probably should have done that a lot more.
Yeah. Maybe in 2016 that was the thing that can help us to beat the Warriors at the end. That was, as you said, Waiters was amazing this series. He defends Thompson, he defends Curry very well, and I believe a lot of Thunder fans love him for that. You know, he take a big part in the heart of the fans because of it. To get back maybe a little bit to your work, everybody knows that one guy had a particular relationship with the Thunder. When he was in OKC, it's obviously Russell Westbrook. Did you have any trouble with him in interviews, or maybe a story to tell about that?
Well, I mean, everybody who covered Russell for as long as I did had some kind of issue at some point. That's just kind of comes with the territory. Russell was fiercely devoted to keeping that team as private as possible, as kind of close to the vest as possible. He's an intense competitor, and I think that competition carried over into his interactions with us too. There was one time in Charlotte, I think this might have been his, or I can't remember what season it was. Maybe it was the season after he won the MVP. Yeah, I think that was it. It was Paul George's first season there. You know, Russell's in Charlotte, and I think a few weeks prior he was in Portland, and he threw a ball toward an official, and it hit the official when he threw the ball. And then in Charlotte, he does a similar thing, and it hits the official in the head, and Russell gets a technical for it. and Russell's going crazy. He's freaking out and he's mad, and basically Mo Cheeks has to like walk with him into the tunnel to kind of like calm him down. So the Thunder ends up losing this game. And after the game, I asked Westbrook, because this is the second time he's done this in probably like a 2 or 3 week span. I say, Russell, like, what would you say to someone who would look at this and say that this might be a trend? This might be something that you're trying to do. What would you say to that? And he basically says, I'll never, and his answer was fine, but his answer was something along the lines of, I would never do that on purpose. I'm not trying to hit officials, da-da-da. But then he goes and he says, why would you ask me something like that? You know I wouldn't do that, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, well, I'm thinking to myself, well, no, actually, I don't know that you wouldn't do that, and that's why I'm asking the question. So he answers everybody else's questions, and then afterwards, he comes back to me, and he's like, what the fuck you think? What the fuck kind of question was that? That was bullshit. And I'm like, Russell, I'm not even accusing you of doing it on purpose. I'm asking, what would you say if someone said that you were doing this on purpose? Because this isn't the first time that you've done this. People are going to look at this as something that is a trend. You did this in Portland too. So then next thing I know, the locker room's cleared out. Me and him are yelling at each other back and forth. We're about 5 feet from each other. And the Thunder PR guy is just standing there watching the whole thing happen. And they got a game in Houston the next night. So Russell walks out of the locker room, and as he's walking out of the locker room, he goes, I won't be seeing you in Houston. And then I yell, well, I will be seeing you in Houston, Russell, because I got to cover your game, and it's my job. I will see you in Houston. And then Russell walks out of the room, and then the Thunder PR guy walks up to me, and he goes, I think that went really well. Just like, and then after that, Russell Westbrook didn't give me a solid answer to a question for 2 months.
No, that the thing he did for some of Thunder beat writer like you, never answers the question if he has something against you. I mean, with Barry Tremmell that was the same. With other sometimes I think he can be rude with journalists like you.
Yeah, and it's kind of part of his persona. It's a game to him, because I think he uses that to keep control of those situations, because he knows that he can kind of manipulate those situations to his advantage. And he did that several times when I covered him. He would basically put guys into what I call timeout if he didn't like the way that a question was asked, and he didn't like the way that you explained why you asked that question. He would basically just cut you off for a certain amount of time until he felt like you were allowed to get an answer from him. So he cut me off until after the All-Star break, and then after the All-Star break, we were fine again. So it's just kind of par for the course when it comes to Russell. And by all accounts, he's been fine in Houston. He's acted decent, and I think that last year in the playoffs was kind of a humbling thing for him. With the Barry Tremmell stuff, and Dame Lillard was like a complete professional compared to Russell, who wasn't. And I think that was something that kind of, probably changes the way that he approaches it too.
Yeah, I think so. He changed his way of approaching it, like you say, in Houston. I mean, I don't think he do the same thing in Houston. And when he came back with Houston to play the Thunder in Oklahoma City, so you were in the game, and how was it to cover it? And did you have a particular things from him? Did he remember you, and there are a connection, or not at all?
He was great. He was great to everybody, and I think that the setting and that night made it to where, it was one of those things where it would have been silly for him to not be respectful and appreciative, because I think it was a celebration of him that night. Even though Houston lost and the Thunder played really well, that night was about honoring him, and the fans were fantastic. I think Russell was great. One thing that I've always admired about him, no matter what we kind of butted heads about, he never took nights off, and he understands that it's not just about him winning in competition, but it's about entertainment, and it's about entertaining the fans. And that night in particular, I thought was one of the most entertaining nights I've ever seen him. He did all the same things he did when he was a Thunder player, run into the crowd and yelling and doing his pregame stuff and playing to the crowd and having a good time during the game. And, people were kind of have different opinions about Russell being polarizing, whether you like his game or not. But one thing you can't really question about Russell is how much he loves to play and how much he loves to entertain. And I think that that's one of the things that people appreciate about him in Oklahoma City more than anything, that he played his hardest for them for, 10 years, and he never took a night off. And that was an awesome night just to be around that. I can think about all the times that we had our little differences or whatever, but I am appreciative of how much he cared about putting on a show for Oklahoma City.
That was really a perfect night for Thunder fans because Russ did a great game and have a great game, and the Thunder won by far and very easily against Houston. Harden was not that good. Ferguson did a great job, and all was perfect. I mean, a lot of French fan was awake, during the night to watch this game more than usual, because that was a Russ comeback. That was a big thing, and I believe everybody liked what the Thunder organization did, how Russell played, how he was around the field, and that was amazing. Like you said.
Yeah. I mean, it worked out. If you were a person who just roots for the Thunder, it worked out perfectly because Russell got to play well, and the Thunder really dominated in every other aspect of the game. Like you were talking about Terrence Ferguson, he played great against James Harden. Chris Paul was awesome. That was a really important game, not just from like a Russell Westbrook standpoint, but the first game that the Thunder played against the Rockets earlier that year, they lost, and they really, that was a game that they probably should have won. So that was important for them to be able to, come back and not come back, but reassert themselves in that game and show as much dominance as they did. And just from a standing standpoint, the Thunder has a 2-1 advantage against the Rockets in the season series. That's important too. So that was a big game. That was a big game for everybody involved.
Yeah. We talked a lot about Westbrook. Now he's not in the franchise anymore, and CP3 is here, and he's also a player who was a big all-around influence, in the organization, in the locker room. Did you see and feel this difference between this year and the year before?
Yeah, when it first started, I tried not to jump to any conclusions about it. I wanted to see kind of how it played out and talk to some people about it and what it was like. And the farther it got into the season, I think the more guys got comfortable kind of talking about the difference. And there was a difference. And I think that, guys kind of walked on eggshells when Russell was there. And it's not to say that wasn't successful, because clearly the Thunder won a lot of games with Russell controlling the locker room and the franchise the way he did. But it's just kind of proof that there are different ways to lead. There are different ways to, run a team and run a locker room. And I think Chris Paul's different. And he does it just as successfully as Westbrook does. And I think that it's a different atmosphere now. It's more loose. Guys get more shots. I think there's a different flow to games now because there was a little bit of an unpredictability when it came to Russell Westbrook in certain situations. You didn't know if he was going to take a bad shot early in the shot clock or a shot that was a low efficiency shot. I think that there's more of a flow when it comes to, closing games, as you've seen with Chris Paul this year. Once they get to the final 5 minutes, you're going to either get a good shot from Chris Paul or he's going to get somebody else a good shot. It's a little bit more of a rhythmic offense in that sense. And in the locker room's just different. I think that, guys it's almost like somebody let off like the pressure valve, and it's a little bit less pressure than it was in previous seasons. And that's just from talking to guys, around the locker room and what it's like to play and to be on the court. So it's different, and I think it works both ways. But the way that it's going now, the Thunder has a chance to be just as good as they were in previous years, without kind of those super duper stars like Westbrook and Paul George.
Yeah, Paul seems to be so smart when he talk, when he played also, and I think that can really help the young players' development. Westbrook was more than take a lot of shots, do a lot of play with a fast pace, take a lot with rhythm. But Chris Paul is able maybe to be more in the player development, to help them to find their position, to help them to be confident, And did you see that? Did you see how he mentor those young players maybe?
Yeah, it's different than how Westbrook did. And it's not that Westbrook didn't help guys. Yeah, sure. Like there's this famous story of, Sabonis was struggling and Westbrook said, "Look, I'll meet you at the facility." And they went late at night and shot together, and Westbrook, worked with him. But it's more of I think it's a stylistic thing that helps guys develop more than the way Westbrook did, because Paul's game is just different. Paul's game is more of a traditional point guard. His usage is lower. He's a guy who will, kind of take a step to the side and not have to be the assist man on every possession. He can play off the ball. He has a willingness to play off the ball more. And I think that helps other guys when they feel like they're more involved and they have more of an investment in the offense, that they're not just, a means to an assist. Because when you play with Russell Westbrook, a lot of what you do has to be catch and shoot. You got to be this guy who's ready to fire and ready to play on the perimeter. That's sort of what happened to Sabonis his first year, because they needed spacing. And I'm working on a story on Darius Bazley. And if you look at his numbers compared to Sabonis's first year, they're very similar in terms of their usage, the types of shots they're taking, and then your traditional stats, points, rebounds, assists. But sometimes when you play with a guy like Russell Westbrook, you have to fill certain roles, and you don't get to do some of the other stuff that it basically requires you to be an all-around basketball player. And I think that is more helpful. I mean, you can develop those skills a little more when you play with a guy like Chris Paul. Not to mention there's just a trust factor that Chris Paul, I think, has with guys that's a little bit more than Russell Westbrook, too. I think toward the end of Westbrook's time in Oklahoma City, he did trust guys more than when he first took over the team post-Durant. It's just that a lot of those guys kind of let him down in some really tough situations. I think about the first game against Portland in the playoffs. Russell played about as good of a game as I think he's ever played in terms of just being a point guard and a facilitator. He shoots 50% from the floor. He doesn't take a ton of threes, makes around 40% of his threes, low turnovers. But Jeremy Grant and Terrence Ferguson just don't make any threes. And he's just hitting them in the corner time and time again, and they don't make any shots. So I think that sometimes is something that gets overlooked too when you were talking about development, is Russell was hitting these guys in places where they had opportunities to make shots and they just didn't.
I believe, for example, if you this year's trio of guards with Paul, Schroeder, and Shea was amazing in the clutch, for example. And I'm not sure if Westbrook was here and no Chris Paul, that works that well, because Paul was able to not take the ball, let the ball to Shea or to Schroeder, who have great season. And that was a big thing, I think, the tree of guard and the clutch things, and Chris Paul is a huge part of it.
Yeah, and a big part of the clutch is just Chris Paul has what's basically for him an automatic shot.
Yeah,
that elbow jump shot late in games is just automatic, and Russell, for as explosive as he is, I just don't know if he has just an automatic shot at this point in his career. Like his mid-range jumper is not as good as it used to be. He's never been a great three-point shooter, and he can get to the rim, but is that an automatic shot in crunch time? Is that something that he can call on in crunch time? With the way that Houston's spacing the floor now, it probably is more of an option that he can get to the rim and score when he needs to in crunch time. But that's such a weapon for Chris Paul late in games now. And even when other teams know it's coming, he can still, all he needs is that one screen and he can get to that spot. And either he's getting free throws or he's going to make that mid-range jump shot. And that's just such a killer for other teams because, the Thunder can set their defense then. I mean, if Chris Paul makes that shot, they can set their defense, and their defense has gone from, early in the season being one of the worst in crunch time to one of the best. And the reason it's one of the best now is because, Chris Paul's so damn efficient. Like, his offense is so efficient now that they can set their defense and they don't have to play with the pressure of having to defend in transition like they were earlier in the season.
And he had this rip move, like you said, to go to the free throw line, rip move of the day, like you said. That always make me laugh because when he plays against you, you hate him to do that, and when he did that for the Thunder, I really like that. And that was always an automatic tweet to like you to say a rip move of the day with Chris Paul, and
it's unbelievable how many times he gets guys with that, man. It's just crazy.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, with all we play and this automatic shoot from the elbow and all those stuff, the Thunder overachieve, this season because everybody saw them not in the playoff, maybe tanking and trade all the good players. But because of Chris Paul and because of the factors like injuries, there are no fifth in the West, and maybe they can play something in the playoff if the playoff are played, of course.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what the format is when the league starts playing again. How many regular season games they're going to play before they go to the playoffs. What the format's going to be once they go to the playoffs. One of the advantages for the Thunder to me, and this plays directly into Chris Paul and how good he is in late game situations, is they were such a good road team this year that I don't think that, some teams have a big advantage playing at home. And the Thunder is one of those teams because their home crowd is really good, but they were so good on the road because Chris Paul was just, if you kept the game close, he was going to give you a chance to win at the end of games. And I think that's going to play an advantage for them playing in a neutral site. You're not going to be able to feed off of a crowd. You're not going to be able, to have that home court advantage. And when all things are neutral, what do you have? You have a guy who can get that shot anytime he wants, and he's going to put you in the right positions to succeed late in games. So I'm interested to see how the league comes back, what it looks like, because I think that I think I have a little bit more confidence in the Thunder now than I did before the coronavirus hit.
Oh, that's interesting to know, because I was very I was trusting the Thunder before the confinement and all those things, especially if you play Utah. And right now with Bogdanovic is hurt and there is inside stuff with the Utah Jazz about Gobert and Mitchell, maybe, and I feel very confident if the Thunder play the Jazz in the first round. And like you said, if you think there is an advantage to play in a neutral place, for example, Utah is a big place. When I remember the playoff 2 years ago, the audience was huge and they play a huge role, and that can be a good thing, like you say.
Yeah, and Utah's got one of the best home crowds in the league. And what happens when you negate that? What happens when you got to play neutral site and it's basically just all bets are off there? I think that plays in the Thunder's favor because they have a guy like Chris Paul. Not to mention, I feel better about the Thunder now because they're going to have an opportunity to be healthier than some of the teams that I think that they'd be going against. Now, if they were to fall to like the 7, I mean, that would be a problem because if they got to play any of the LA teams, that's going to be a problem because the Clippers are awesome, can switch at every position. They've got guys who can just make big shots at the end of games that are going to be able to score against that 3-guard lineup. The Lakers, same thing. They're going to be mismatch problems. But I really like the Thunder's chances against Utah because of the Bogdanovich injury. Mm-hmm. I like their chances against Denver because I think that this is a tougher team than previous years where Denver had kind of gotten used to playing them, and Denver was starting to get a psychological advantage playing against the Thunder. They weren't scared of them the way they were when those guys were younger, when Murray and Jokic were younger. They're not scared of the Thunder anymore. But I think that the Thunder matches up better against Denver than they did in previous years. And then if they have to play Houston, I mean, all bets are off there because Harden's going to be awesome. Westbrook is going to be motivated, and Chris Paul's going to be motivated too. I think that might be the most interesting series if they had to play Houston. I think that would be really interesting in terms of the matchups. I give Houston the edge because I think just stopping Harden would be just really tough, especially with Dort being inexperienced, Ferguson, not playing as well as he had last year. He can do it in spurts, but Harden would get him in foul trouble. And then if they want to play the 3-guard lineup, I don't know how long they could stop Harden in a series.
Yeah. I mean, Shea will be the primary defender on Harden. So I'm not sure this is the best guy to put on James Harden right now. Ferguson, I think it's way better to defend Harden. And the storyline about this series, Thunder Houston, if it's happened, that's gonna be amazing. I think for you guys, for the journalist and beat writer, you have a lot of story to write and a lot of things, and all the fans gonna be mad because Houston and Oklahoma City, I mean, there's a kind of rivalry between those two cities or those two teams after all this season, after the Beverly things, after the trades, after all those things. Yeah.
I actually think in the Houston series that Dort would be the first guy that would guard Harden. I think they'd put Shea on Westbrook because you would want. Now, if he gets out in transition, all bets are off. I mean, that's just a problem. Which is why the Thunder really have to be efficient against Houston and obviously make shots in the half court, but also control the glass. But I think that in that matchup where the Thunder beat them at home, the Thunder was okay with Westbrook posting up Shea. They were okay with that. Mm-hmm. If Westbrook wants to go into the post against Shea and settle for a shot that's going to be contested, or if he's going to get a 2, I think they'd rather that than Harden hitting the step back or PJ Tucker pulling up from the corner off of penetration. Dort would be a little bit more disruptive on Harden at the point of attack. And then you rotate Ferguson in there who can Ferguson, when he's really locked in, has good enough footwork to where he can kind of avoid those fouls on Harden. We've seen that before. A mix of Dort and Ferguson, and then some Schroeder late in games too, because Schroeder is a guy who's confident enough to take that challenge on Harden. I think that they can give him I guess, is some problems. I mean, but you can only stop Harden for so long. But I think Dort will be the guy who would start on him at the beginning of games.
Yeah. We mentioned sometimes during this podcast Terence Ferguson, Lou Dort right now, and we can add to these guys Hamidou Diallo, Abdul-Nader. How do you see the future of those guys in OKC? You know, Thunder have to make choice about them this summer because Dort is a two-way player, Nader has a team option, Diallo too, Burton too. How do you see the future of those guys?
Yeah, the only guy that I think is a sure thing to be around for the next couple of years at least is a guy like Darius Bazley, who they spent a draft pick on, who's 19, has a lot of tools. Dort's played his way into that conversation too, and he's a guy that it's not going to take a ton of money to be able to sign him because he's young. But big question marks about guys like Nader, Diallo, Ferguson. You bring Ferguson back for the last year of his rookie deal because he's not going to get, the qualifying offer for him is small. It'll be easy to bring him back for less than $4 million. But you still got some time to decide about a guy like Diallo. He's still on his rookie deal. Nader is going to be. Nader has an option. I think it's just a team option, which isn't a ton of money. It's $1.5 million in that range. So, if you want to bring him back on that, and just to bring him back into the season, and then maybe, if you want to keep him, fine. It's not going to cost you that much. If you want to include him in a trade package or something, you could do that too. But, in terms of those guys' future, it's going to be interesting to see who gets to play and how much when the season comes back and when the playoffs start. Because, a guy like Abdul Nader, he's not as young as these other guys. Yeah. I think he's 26 years old, but he really did himself, a lot of good this season and just, playing solid ball. Like he didn't embarrass himself on offense or defense this year. I think he was shooting around 41% from three once Bazley went out with the injury in around February. So Nader's a guy who shot the ball better. His help defense has been much improved. He can slide up to small ball 4, which we've seen Billy Donovan do. He's a guy who has earned a lot of trust within that organization. I don't know if that's going to help them in the playoffs. You're probably not going to want to see a ton of him at small ball 4, especially since Bazley's going to come back and give you more length and a little bit more in terms of defensive versatility. Mm-hmm. But Nader's a guy who they're going to have to think about a little bit more now going forward. And there's still time on Ferguson and Diallo, so they don't have to feel like they have to be drastic or make any kind of decisions on them that are going to be, we got to trade this guy or whatever. But, the key thing for Ferguson is his aggression. He's got to up that. The key thing for Diallo, aside from staying healthy, is he's got to quit fouling so damn much. Hamidou Diallo fouls way too much, and he doesn't really have any kind of semblance of a jump shot yet. Even though Ferguson doesn't make a lot of jump shots, you can at least say that he has some kind of decent form on his to where he can get into some hot streaks. Diallo's still got to find a jump shot. He's still got to stop fouling so much. Frankly, Ferguson's got to stop fouling so much too. So I don't know what the future is long term for any of those guys, except I think Bazley's the one that you can count on for sure that they're going to have in the next 2 to 3 years to go alongside Shea.
One thing a little bit funny, I'm a little bit high on Abdul-Nader. I like him. I like the way he's playing. He can help the offense. He can create. I like when he take a rebound and he try to go coast to coast. Sometimes it's a little bit not efficient, but he tried. And French fans are not that high on Abdul-Nader, and I try to defend him all the time. And I like Ferguson too, but I think it's a confidence thing, about this shooting form, about how he can be efficient. Last year he was good. He was about 40% for months, and this year he was maybe negative in offense, and that was hard to play him sometimes in offense. He played because he was so good in defense, like we said, and I think it's a confidence thing with him. There is a story, like you said, for Sabonis with Westbrook and Ferguson, where Westbrook helped him to go to find his rhythm on shooting, and that works last year, but not this year. And I hope his last year on his rookie contract, he can fix that.
Yeah, and I hope that he can find some kind of rhythm somewhere, whether it's with his shot in the half court, which hopefully he's been able to practice during the downtime, or even just get his mind off of it. And maybe the timing will be good for him in terms of finding his offense, because maybe he was overthinking some. Yeah. But they're just little things that he still needs to get better at. He still needs to get better at attacking closeouts, drawing the defense, and maybe not every time trying to go up for a layup, because we know he's not very successful at that because he's not strong. Drawing that defense and making a pass to another player. His off-ball cuts at times have been good. Getting to the free throw line more, having confidence to drive and take contact and get to the free throw line, because he's not a terrible free throw shooter. I think there are tools there. There really are. It's just, he lost his confidence somewhere during the season, and it hasn't helped that when he got back, Dort was playing really well relative to what they needed at that position. So obviously the defensive part is probably his strength right now, his ability to, chase guys off screens, be a disruptor when he's not fouling. But the offense has just such a long way to go to me in terms of the confidence that, it's hard for me to see how valuable he's going to be for them in a playoff series yet. I know the defensive part, they're going to need him, but I think about the offense, and I think that he can really hurt them in some instances because of his unwillingness on offense.
I agree with you. He has so much athleticism. Ferguson, he can jump that high, and he never used that. He never used that to half court. He can use that on transition, but with no more Westbrook, there is no transition with Chris Paul. It's more a slow team, so it's hard for him to have this situation. So you have to use, like you say, this athleticism to drive to the hoop and try to make stuff around the hoop and develop his strength to absorb contact and go to the free throw line, because, like you said, he's good on the free throw line. Yeah,
he's not a bad free throw shooter. So it's like a lot of these Thunder guys, man, he's got a long way to go. And that's kind of what the Thunder's been known for, man, taking these guys that they think they can, turn into complete players, but they'll be good at one thing in particular, but that's not enough to make up for not having skills at all the other stuff that you need to be a contributing basketball player. Even a guy like Andre Robertson, he literally had to be the best defender, the best perimeter defender on the planet to justify playing him. Mm-hmm. Like, if he's anything less than that, it's not worth it. He had to be the best perimeter defender on earth. And he was, until he got hurt. So it's like, you would like for the Thunder to develop some guys, to have some guys with some more all-around skills, which is why when you look at a guy like Darius Bazley, you kind of get excited because you can see kind of the roots of a guy that kind of has feel. He gets it. He knows he can put the ball on the floor. He can contort when somebody's trying to contest him at the rim. He can kind of navigate around guys and like find a shot in midair. He's not afraid to shoot. when you see a guy like Bazley and you're like, okay, that's kind of the recipe that we're looking for in terms of a guy that can contribute in more than one area.
Yeah, sure. About all of those young players, I can just advise everybody to read your articles, your series of articles about them. You wrote some articles about players' development with video, with stats, with all those things, and that's very good. I mean, the last one about Ferguson, we talk a little bit about him, and that was very good. And we talk about strength. You talk about that in your article.
Yeah, and I'll have one about Darius Bazley this week. It might be out by the time you post the podcast. I'm still working on it a little bit, but really interesting just looking at Bazley and how he's played this year. And I'm not saying he is Domantas Sabonis because he's not stylistically. Mm-hmm. I think he's closer to like a Joe Ingles and I'm not saying he's Joe Ingles because Joe Ingles is a fantastic basketball player. But if you looked at like a best case scenario, you'd see him turning into a more athletic version of that. A guy who's a competent defender, who can put the ball on the deck, left-handed playmaker, can go between the 3 and the 4 spot, mm-hmm. and is a guy who can play in a bunch of different kind of lineups to where you plug him in and he's going to be a guy that can create some offense and not kill you on defense. But when I bring up the Sabonis thing, it's like the way that the Thunder's kind of used him this year is similar to the way that they used Sabonis his first year. A lot of catch and shoots from 3, even though that's not necessarily a strength. And just the per minute numbers are very similar, particularly with the usage. But what's encouraging is that he's already a guy who has like a higher usage than a Terrence Ferguson or an Andre Robertson. Like he's not just out there just taking up space. Like Bazley's going to do stuff when he's out there. And that's really encouraging from a 19-year-old who hasn't played basketball as much as some of these other guys. Yeah, that's really encouraging.
Yeah, I agree with you. And one thing positive with him, it's at the beginning of the season, you might not bet that he gonna play all this time, like maybe 15 minutes per game, something like that, when he was not hurt.
Yeah. So
it's very encouraging to see him already here, already in the rotation, and already doing stuff, create shoots. He has a night when he shoot maybe 4 for 4 for 3 or something like that. I don't know if you remember, but that was very impressive. And his ceiling can be very high.
Yeah, I think he's got a chance to be a rotation guy for them in the future. That's the guy along with Shea and Dort. If Dort can, kind of iron out his jump shot a little bit, it kind of comes and goes. But I also like Dort too. I like that Dort's not afraid to put the ball on the ground and drive. He's a guy who can take it off the backboard and go coast to coast. I really like what I've seen from him too, considering he's only 20. So those 3 guys to me are guys that you can say are going to be a part of the Thunder for the next 2 to 3 years. The rest of the guys to me, the rest of the young ones are up in the air.
Okay. I think we have to conclude this episode right now. Thank you so much for coming on. That was a real pleasure to talk with you. That was very interesting. And I'm looking forward to read your next work on the Thunder. So about Darius Bazley, as you said.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Pierre. Talking about the Thunder gets me excited about, watching them again and getting back into the groove. And I know it's been tough for a lot of people out there not having basketball, but from everything that's been written and that people are talking about, it's getting closer. We're getting closer to getting it back, and I know the players are excited. So I'm getting excited too.
Maybe in Disney World soon.
Yeah, we can go down to Disney World and wear masks and stay away from each other.
Yeah. That's gonna be weird for you, I think. If you have to go there, I think to stay far from each other, that's gonna be a real thing to live, I think.
Yeah. The whole thing's going to be adjusting for everybody, but I think everybody's going to be so happy that the game's back that we'll get back into it pretty quickly.
Again, Eric, thank you so much. And now I have to conclude in French. Donc en français maintenant, j'espère vraiment que cet épisode vous a plu. C'était vraiment quelque chose d'énorme pour moi de parler avec Erik Horne. Je m'excuse encore une fois pour toutes les fautes d'anglais que j'ai pu faire dans l'épisode. Je pense qu'il y en a beaucoup, mais j'ai fait de mon mieux. J'espère que ça reste compréhensible. N'hésitez pas à me faire vos retours sur l'épisode si ça vous a plu, si les épisodes en anglais ça vous intéresse, puisque ça permet d'avoir de sacrés invités. J'espère en faire d'autres avec d'autres invités. N'hésitez pas aussi si vous avez des points que vous n'avez pas compris et que vous voulez une traduction, n'hésitez pas à me le dire en commentaire et je le ferai avec plaisir. Voilà, j'espère que ça vous a plu autant que moi. On se retrouve très vite, peut-être pour des playoffs. Et en attendant, prenez soin de vous.